My name is Alex Morgan, and I'm 34 years old. This happened one autumn in 2023 when I, along with my closest friends, decided to escape the relentless pace of Chicago life and take our battered RV deep into the heart of southern Illinois. We were headed for a place called Witches Hollow, a secluded clearing in the Shawnee National Forest with a notorious reputation. I had hoped for a quiet retreat, a brief respite from the urban chaos, but fate had something far darker in store for us. The idea for the trip had been Jamie's from the very start. Ever since we'd all met in college, Jamie Rivera's wild enthusiasm for the paranormal and local legends had been contagious. "We have to see Witches Hollow," Jamie had insisted over countless late-night discussions. "They say the ghost of an old witch roams those woods, exacting vengeance on anyone who dares disturb her resting place." I was skeptical, of course. I prefer logic and reason to superstition, but the prospect of a weekend adventure with friends, even with a touch of the inexplicable, was too tempting to pass up. Casey Thompson, always anxious but quick with a joke to hide his trepidation, and Sam Bennett, the quiet researcher with a passion for the occult, joined us. Each of us had our own reasons for embarking on this journey. Jamie craved the thrill, Sam was eager to document every detail for his blog, and I, despite my reservations, needed a break from the relentless stress of city life. Our RV was a relic from a bygone era, its engine a constant groan and its interior a maze of outdated controls and half-functional gadgets. The vehicle's brakes squealed every time we hit the road, and the heater had a habit of sputtering at the worst possible moments. Yet as we left behind the glittering skyline of Chicago, the excitement of the unknown gave us a sense of purpose. We were heading toward Witches Hollow, a place steeped in eerie local lore, a cursed clearing where, it was said, the vengeful spirit of a wronged witch still roamed. The journey itself was fraught with small, ominous setbacks. We soon discovered that our navigational tools were less than reliable. A misprinted map and a malfunctioning GPS led us off the main road, deep into a labyrinth of narrow, winding back roads. The further we went, the more isolated the environment became. By the time we pulled up to what we later identified as the outskirts of Witches Hollow, dusk had already begun to settle over the forest. The cool air was a stark contrast to the lingering warmth of the day, and an inexplicable chill crept over me as I surveyed the unfamiliar surroundings. That first night, we set up camp near a cluster of ancient trees, their gnarled branches twisting into the twilight sky. The forest seemed to breathe with a life of its own, and every rustle in the underbrush made my skin crawl. We gathered around a small fire, trying to shake off the feeling of being watched. Casey cracked jokes to ease the tension, though his laughter was forced. Jamie, ever the enthusiast, regaled us with stories of the witch's curse and the many travelers who had encountered her malevolent presence. Sam, who had spent hours researching local history, interjected with grim details about the witch's tragic past, of a woman accused of sorcery and burned at the stake, her dying curse condemning the land to perpetual unrest. As night deepened, so did the sense of unease. I remember a moment when I stepped away from the fire to collect some firewood. The forest was eerily silent, and my own footsteps sounded unnaturally loud on the soft ground. That's when I heard it, a series of deliberate, measured footsteps following me. I spun around, expecting to see one of my friends playing a prank, but there was no one there. The rustling leaves and the faint murmur of distant whispers seemed to answer back my growing dread. I hurried back to the camp, heart pounding, trying to convince myself that it was just the wind. Over the next couple of days, our misfortunes multiplied. The RV, already temperamental, began to exhibit more serious mechanical issues. The heater failed during a cold, rain-soaked night, forcing us to huddle under blankets and share body heat. Our supplies dwindled as the unreliable RV radio picked up distorted, unintelligible voices, a cacophony of static that sounded eerily like whispered warnings. These small incidents, while seemingly isolated at first, began to add up, feeding into an atmosphere of mounting terror. One evening, as we sat around the flickering campfire, the temperature dropped suddenly despite the lingering heat of the day. I noticed Casey's eyes darting nervously around, his humor evaporating in the face of an inexplicable fear. "Did you feel that?" he asked in a tremulous voice. Before any of us could answer, a soft, almost childlike giggle floated through the darkness from somewhere deep within the forest. Jamie's face lit up with excitement as he insisted it must be the ghost of the cursed witch. I, however, felt only dread, a sense that something was very, very wrong. The tension in our little group grew palpable. Jamie's excitement bordered on mania as he urged us to explore further, to find the source of these strange sounds. Sam, ever the cautious scholar, tried to dissuade us, arguing that there were ancient symbols carved into the trees around the clearing that suggested the area was steeped in ritualistic significance. I found myself caught in the middle of a tug-of-war between rational caution and reckless curiosity. As the night wore on, our conversation devolved into a heated debate about whether to stay put and wait for dawn, or to venture deeper into the forest in search of answers. My own skepticism was being tested to its limit. The forest no longer felt like an adventure waiting to happen. It felt like a trap, a place where the boundaries between the living and the dead blurred with every passing minute. That night, as I lay in the cramped bed of our RV, sleep eluded. The quiet was oppressive, punctuated only by the occasional snap of a twig or the distant rustle of leaves. I kept replaying the whispered voices and the mysterious giggle in my mind, a haunting refrain that I couldn't shake off. It was on the third night that things took a turn for the worse. We had planned a late-night discussion of the local lore around the dying embers of our fire. Sam had brought along a worn, leather-bound notebook filled with historical accounts and legends of the area. As he read aloud, describing the witch's final moments and her curse upon the land, the temperature in the clearing plummeted further. I remember feeling a presence, as if unseen eyes were fixed on us from the darkness. Suddenly the air was filled with the sound of low, mournful chanting, a cadence that seemed to vibrate through the very earth beneath us. At that moment I caught a glimpse of her, a spectral figure standing at the edge of the light cast by the fire. Her form was almost translucent, draped in tattered garments that fluttered as if caught in an unseen wind. Her eyes, glowing with an otherworldly intensity, locked onto mine. I felt as though she was trying to communicate, to convey a message, steeped in anguish and rage. The sight was so visceral, so horrifyingly real that I could not tear my eyes away. For a moment, time seemed to freeze, and I was left with the chilling realization that the legends were not merely stories. They were warnings. The impact of that encounter was immediate and profound. We argued heatedly about what to do next. Jamie, invigorated by the sight, demanded we follow her into the forest, convinced that uncovering her story would solve the mystery of Witch's Hollow. I, however, insisted that we needed to leave immediately, to put as much distance as possible between ourselves and that malevolent presence. Sam suggested that we might have a chance to appease her if we could find the relics mentioned in his research, old artifacts hidden away in an abandoned cabin somewhere in the forest, said to hold the key to her restless spirit. Casey, caught in the throes of terror, vacillated between panic and pleading for us to do something, anything, to end the nightmare. With tensions running high and the night growing ever darker, we made a desperate plan. Under the ghostly light of a full moon, we decided to split up. Sam and Jamie would venture into the depths of the forest to locate the cabin and retrieve the necessary relics for a ritual that, according to local lore, might temporarily quell the witch's wrath. I would remain with Casey, fortifying our makeshift campsite and trying to keep the terror at bay. I did not want to leave Casey alone, even though his anxiety was already bordering on panic. I still remember the dreadful moment we parted ways. Casey's eyes were wide with fear as he clutched a frayed blanket, while I tried to offer him reassuring words even as my own heart hammered in my chest. "We'll be back soon," I murmured, though I wasn't sure I believed it myself. The RV creaked and groaned in the cold night air as I sat there, listening to the fading echoes of our friend's footsteps disappearing into the darkness. The night wore on with excruciating slowness. Every creak of the RV and every whisper of wind against the metal sent waves of terror through me. I kept a close watch on the perimeter, my senses straining for any sign of movement. At one point, I thought I saw a flash of movement out of the corner of my eye, a shadow that seemed to glide past the window. I pressed myself against the cold metal of the RV, trying to steady my breathing, but the feeling of being watched never left me. Then, without warning, the supernatural terror erupted into full-blown chaos. I was jolted awake by a deafening crash that reverberated through the RV. The door burst open, and before I could react, a violent force slammed into the interior. In the ensuing melee, I saw a flash of that spectral woman, the witch, her face twisted in rage, her eyes burning with a furious intensity. The force of her presence was overwhelming, and I could only watch in helpless horror as the chaos unfolded. In the midst of the commotion, I heard Casey cry out. I scrambled to his side, but it was too late. A burst of raw, unholy energy had struck him, and he collapsed with a pained scream that still echoes in my memory. The RV shuddered under the force of the supernatural onslaught, and I was thrown against the wall. The world spun around me, and for a few agonizing moments I was submerged in darkness before my senses returned with painful clarity. Gritting my teeth against the rising tide of despair, I forced myself to focus. I knew that if we were to have any hope of survival, I had to maintain control of the situation, even as the witch's wrath raged around us. I managed to drag Casey into a corner of the RV and attempted to staunch his bleeding, all the while shouting for Sam and Jamie to hurry back with the relics. My voice, hoarse and trembling, seemed swallowed up by the roaring supernatural storm outside. Time lost all meaning as I clung to the RV for what felt like an eternity. The wind howled like a living thing, and I could hear the witch's furious wail piercing through the night. In that moment, I realized that our encounter with Witch's Hollow was not a mere haunting. It was a violent, almost tangible force of nature, intent on wreaking havoc on anyone who dared enter her domain. I prayed silently that Sam and Jamie would return in time with something to halt this relentless terror. Eventually, amid the cacophony of destruction, I heard the distant sound of hurried footsteps and the rustle of leaves. Sam and Jamie had returned, their voices laced with desperation. They burst through the RV's door, clutching a handful of strange, weathered artifacts and muttering hurried incantations. Jamie's eyes shone with a mixture of determination and fear, while Sam's usually calm demeanor was shattered by the evident strain of the ordeal. "We found it," Sam gasped, barely pausing to catch his breath. "The relics, the old medallion and the carved stone, they're supposed to be part of a ritual that can hold her back, if only temporarily." His voice trembled as he spoke, and I could see that he, too, was fighting to maintain his composure in the face of unspeakable horror. We hastily arranged ourselves in the cramped interior of the RV, the artifacts clutched in trembling hands. The ritual instructions, scrawled in faded ink on Sam's notebook, demanded that we recite certain phrases and arrange the relics in a precise formation. There was no time to debate. The witch's presence was growing stronger, and the RV shook, violently as if the very ground were protesting our defiance. With grim determination, we began the ritual. My voice, though shaky, joined with the murmurs of Sam and Jamie as we recited the incantations. Outside, the spectral presence roared in defiance, a terrible sound that blended with the howling wind and the relentless creaking of the RV. For a few heart-stopping minutes, it felt as though time had slowed to a crawl. Every word we uttered seemed to strain against the weight of centuries of malevolence, every syllable a battle against an ancient curse. In the midst of the ritual, I felt a searing pain in my side as the witch's spectral force lashed out again. I gritted my teeth, determined not to falter, knowing that the slightest lapse could mean our doom. My eyes locked with Sam's, and in that silent exchange, I saw the unspoken understanding that we were fighting not just for our lives, but for our very souls. The witch's fury was palpable, a living, breathing embodiment of centuries of anger and sorrow. Then, as suddenly as it had all begun, the onslaught abated. The violent gusts of wind subsided, and a haunting silence fell over the forest. The artifacts pulsed with a strange, subdued light, and the oppressive presence that had invaded our RV seemed to recede, as if forced back by our desperate ritual. I slumped against the wall, my body trembling with both relief and grief, my ears still ringing with the echoes of that infernal scream. But the reprieve was bitter and short-lived. Casey's lifeless form lay at my feet, a stark, agonizing reminder of the price we had paid. His eyes, once filled with nervous humor, were now dull and empty. I felt a crushing weight of guilt and sorrow as I cradled his hand, whispering apologies and promises that I could never truly keep. That night, as I stared at the spectral remains of our shattered hope, I realized that our encounter with the witch was not something that could be easily forgotten or undone. It was an indelible scar on our souls. In the days that followed, we stayed huddled in that desolate clearing, too terrified to move, too haunted to rest. Sam meticulously recorded every detail of the encounter, his notebook filled with desperate scribbles that chronicled our brush with ancient evil. Jamie, whose initial exhilaration had given way to a deep-seated terror, paced back and forth, muttering to himself about the promises of the witch's curse. I found myself trapped in a waking nightmare, my rational mind reeling, under the weight of the unexplainable events that had unfolded before my eyes. When dawn finally broke, its weak light barely penetrating the oppressive canopy of the forest, we made the heart-wrenching decision to leave Witch's Hollow. The ritual had only been a temporary measure, a momentary reprieve from a force that we knew still lurked in the shadows. With heavy hearts and a silence laden with unspoken grief, we started the RV and began the long, haunted drive back toward civilization. Throughout the journey, the atmosphere in the RV was suffused with an eerie quiet. Every bump in the road, every creak of the old chassis, served as a reminder of the terror we had endured. Sam continued to speak in hushed tones about the legends and curses of Witch's Hollow, as if by recounting them, he could somehow contain the malevolence that clung to our memories. Jamie, once so vivacious and curious, sat silently in the back, his eyes often distant and unfocused, as if haunted by the specter of that terrible night. I, burdened by guilt and haunted by the spectral gaze of the witch, found solace only in the numbness of my thoughts. As we approached the outskirts of civilization, I kept glancing into the rearview mirror, half expecting to see that vengeful spirit lurking in the darkness behind us. I knew deep down that Witch's Hollow was not a place that could ever truly be left behind. Its legacy was etched into the very fabric of our being, a constant reminder that some horrors are not confined to the pages of local legend, but live on, ever present, waiting for the unwary. Months have passed since that dreadful journey, yet the memories remain as vivid as if they had occurred yesterday. I still wake in the middle of the night, drenched in cold sweat, haunted by the ghostly visage of that witch and the sound of Casey's final desperate cry. Sam has since published his account online, a meticulous chronicle of our ordeal that has sparked heated debates among paranormal enthusiasts and skeptics alike. Jamie rarely speaks of that night now. The once insatiable hunger for the supernatural has been replaced by a cautious dread of what lies beyond the veil of our world. I often wonder if, in another life, I could have made different choices, if I could have listened more closely to the subtle warnings whispered on the wind, if I could have resisted the lure of forbidden knowledge. But Witch's Hollow has taught me that some mysteries are better left untouched, some legends left unchallenged. The curse of that haunted clearing remains an open wound, a stark reminder that the line between myth and reality is thinner than we dare to imagine. Now, when I drive along the quiet back roads of Illinois, I sometimes feel the prickling of unseen eyes watching from the trees. I can almost hear the distant, ghostly laughter of a child and the mournful whisper of a centuries-old curse. And every so often, when the night is at its darkest and the wind carries a hint of decay, I swear I see a figure standing at the edge of the forest. A woman in tattered garments, her eyes burning with a familiar, unearthly light, silently beckoning me back to Witch's Hollow. I have learned to live with the scars of that night, though the cost was immeasurable. I carry the memory of Casey, whose life was tragically cut short by a force that defied explanation. I bear the weight of the knowledge that, even in our modern world, the past is never truly dead. It lingers in the shadows, waiting for an opportunity to resurface to remind us that some evils are eternal. And as for me, I continue to drive, haunted by a past I can never escape, forever marked by the curse of Witch's Hollow, a nightmare that will continue to echo in the quiet recesses of my mind, long after the fire of that cursed night has burned out. That journey into the heart of darkness changed me. I learned that courage is not the absence of fear, but the resolve to face it, even when confronted with the unimaginable. I learned that some legends have a life of their own, and that the boundaries between the living and the dead are perilously thin. And most of all, I learned that in the realm of the supernatural, there are no guarantees, only the harsh, unyielding truth that some terrors will never be banished, only temporarily held at bay by desperate acts and fragile hope. Today I write these words in an attempt to make sense of it all, to piece together the shattered fragments of memory and terror into a narrative that might serve as a warning. Witch's Hollow still calls to me in dreams and waking moments alike, a constant reminder that the past is never truly gone, and though I have tried to move forward, the echoes of that cursed night continue to follow me like a shadow, an ever-present reminder that sometimes the darkest horrors are not confined to the pages of a legend, but reside in the very heart of our world. As I close this account, I find myself glancing one last time toward the darkened horizon, where the silhouettes of ancient trees stand guard over secrets long forgotten. I wonder if the witch's spirit still roams those woods, waiting for the next unwary traveler to cross her path, and I shudder to think that one day I might have to return to that haunted clearing, if only to confront the part of me that will forever be bound to Witch's Hollow. The road ahead is uncertain, and though I try to embrace the ordinary, the extraordinary memories of that fateful trip continue to intrude. Each creak of the RV, each rustle in the underbrush, serves as a reminder of that night, a night when a vengeful spirit tore through our fragile lives, leaving behind a trail of sorrow and terror. I carry the lessons of Witch's Hollow with me, etched in every cautious step I take along these quiet back roads. And though I have learned to live with the memories, I will never forget the price of curiosity, the cost of defying ancient curses, and the terrible truth that some legends are all too real. I share this story not for sympathy, nor to glorify the horror of that night, but as a cautionary tale, a reminder that the unknown is vast and perilous, and that sometimes the very ground beneath our feet is haunted by the ghosts of a bitter past. My name is Alex Morgan, and at 34, I have seen things that have forever altered my understanding of reality. I only hope that those who listen to this tale will think twice before chasing the lure of forbidden mysteries, and that they will respect the boundaries that separate our world from the dark forces that lie beyond. My name is Ryan Taylor, and I'm 42 years old. This happened in the fall of 2023, shortly after my divorce had left me emotionally adrift and desperate for a new beginning. I loaded up my old RV, a creaking, temperamental relic that had seen better days, and left behind the concrete maze of Chicago in search of solace along the rugged, windswept shores of Illinois Beach State Park near Zion, Illinois. I'd heard whispers about this place, tales of mysterious radio signals, eerie lights dancing along the water, and ghostly apparitions seen by those alone in the night. I wasn't one to believe in supernatural nonsense, yet something deep inside urged me to seek refuge in its isolation. The drive north was both meditative and bittersweet. I let the miles wash over me like a quiet lullaby, my thoughts drifting between memories of a painful past and a tentative hope for renewal. The RV groaned and coughed its way along narrow back roads, its engine occasionally hiccuping as if protesting the long journey ahead. I fiddled with the radio, a device that was as temperamental as the vehicle itself, hoping for a clear station, but mostly greeted by static and the occasional burst of unintelligible chatter. Still, every so often when dusk fell and the world softened into twilight, a faint melody would emerge through the crackling speakers. It wasn't a station I recognized, nor was it a song I'd ever heard before, but its delicate strains stirred something in me. Memories of lost love, regrets, and long-forgotten promises. When I finally arrived at Illinois Beach State Park, I was struck by the raw beauty of the place. The shoreline stretched out in a vast untamed expanse where towering dunes met the churning waves of Lake Michigan. The sound of the water crashing against the sand was relentless, like nature's own heartbeat, steady and profound. I parked my RV in a small, secluded clearing among clusters of wind-blown pines and sand dunes, and as I stepped out into the cool evening air, I felt an inexplicable shiver crawl down my spine. It wasn't just the chill of the coming night. It was something else, a lingering sense that I wasn't entirely alone. The first few days were surprisingly peaceful. I spent my mornings sipping coffee on the RV's creaky porch, watching the sunrise paint the sky in hues of pink and orange over the lake. In the soft light of dusk, I'd often find myself drawn to the water's edge, mesmerized by the reflective ripples that danced across the surface. Sometimes I swore I caught glimpses of scenes from my past in those ripples, fleeting images of a happier time, moments that now seemed as distant as the stars that peppered the night sky. I tried to chalk it up to loneliness, a trick my mind was playing on me as I sought meaning in solitude. Yet as the days wore on, small oddities began to accumulate. One crisp evening, while I was fiddling with the RV's faulty heater, a device that had repeatedly left me shivering in the cold, I noticed that the radio, which had been stubbornly silent, began to emit a series of soft, almost imperceptible whispers. They were too quiet to make out clearly, and yet I could swear that among the murmurs were fragments of old love songs, long-forgotten ballads that tugged at my heart. The voices weren't aggressive, nor were they inviting. They were tinged with sorrow, like distant echoes of a love lost to time. I sat there in silence, half listening, half wondering if the wind was carrying memories from some other time and place. Then, one morning, while I was rummaging through a dusty drawer in a cramped corner of the RV, I discovered a weathered, handwritten journal tucked away beneath a stack of old maps and faded postcards. Its cover was worn, the ink on its pages faded and smudged by time. Curious, I began to read. The journal belonged to a local fisherman, a man who had once roamed these very shores. His words told the tragic tale of a love lost to the unforgiving forces of the lake. He wrote of a beautiful woman whose life was claimed by a sudden, devastating shipwreck, and of the sorrow that had haunted him ever since. As I turned each fragile page, I couldn't help but notice how many of his experiences mirrored my own feelings of grief and regret. The lines between his long-ago pain and my present heartache blurred, leaving me to wonder if the journal was simply a relic of the past, or a message meant specifically for someone in need of solace. The discovery of the journal unsettled me in a way I hadn't anticipated. I began to see the park with new eyes, as a repository of memories and secrets, where the past and present intertwined in unexpected ways. Late at night, as I lay awake in the dim interior of the RV, the whispering voices on the radio seemed to grow more insistent. They carried with them a subtle, melancholic tune that mingled with the howl of the wind off the lake. I'd find myself staring at the ceiling, trying to decipher if the voices were real or if they were merely the sound of my own memories echoing back at me. One particularly stormy night, when the wind had risen to a furious roar and the skies above Lake Michigan were painted with angry streaks of lightning, everything came to a head. I was in the middle of securing the RV against the onslaught of the storm when the radio suddenly burst into a torrent of distorted voices and muffled, desperate love ballads. It was as if the device had become a portal for the very souls of the past, broadcasting their heartache for all to hear. The sound was both terrifying and strangely beautiful, a lament that filled the air with an overwhelming sense of loss and longing. Compelled by a mix of fear and curiosity, I stepped outside into the raging tempest. The wind whipped against my face, stinging with icy precision as I made my way toward the dunes. The rain lashed down, blurring the line between sea and sky, and in that chaotic moment, I saw her. Standing on the edge of a high dune, silhouetted against the flashing lightning, was a spectral figure, a luminous, sorrowful presence that seemed to embody every word of the tragic tale in the journal. Her form was delicate, almost ethereal, yet her eyes shone with an intensity that cut straight through me. For a heartbeat, I couldn't move, transfixed by the sight of this woman who appeared to be reaching out from another realm. I couldn't tell if she was real or a trick of the storm. But in that moment, everything shifted inside me. The spectral figure evoked all the ghosts of my own past, memories of a failed marriage, of words left unsaid, of a love that had slipped away too easily. I felt an overwhelming compulsion to speak, to bridge the gap between the living and the dead. "I'm sorry," I called out, my voice nearly lost in the tempest. "I'm so sorry for everything." My words were carried away by the howling, wind mingling with the relentless crash of the waves and the mournful notes from the radio. The apparition did not speak. She simply watched me with those all-knowing eyes, as if waiting for some kind of answer. For what felt like an eternity, I stood there on that wind-swept beach, caught between the fury of the storm and the quiet intensity of my own remorse. The spectral figure, at once both menacing and heartbreakingly tragic, seemed to embody every ounce of sorrow that I had buried inside. The boundaries between my inner demons and the supernatural forces of the park had blurred, and I realized with a start that this was no ordinary haunting. It was a confrontation with my own soul. As the storm raged on, I gathered what little courage I possessed and approached her. With every step, my heart pounded louder, as if echoing the turbulent rhythm of the storm. I could see now that her features were strikingly reminiscent of the woman in the journal, a woman whose tragic fate had been etched into the memories of this place. Standing before her, I felt both the crushing weight of my past and the possibility of redemption. I reached out, my hand trembling in the cold rain, and whispered, "Please forgive me. Forgive me for not holding on, for letting you go." Whether she understood or not, whether she was truly a spirit from another time or a manifestation of my own grief, I felt compelled to atone for the sins of my heart. In that raw, intense moment, the wind seemed to quiet, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. The spectral figure's eyes softened, and for a brief shining moment I sensed a deep empathy there, a silent acknowledgement of the shared pain that connected us across time. I don't know how long that moment lasted. Time itself seemed to stretch and warp in the face of such profound emotion, but as quickly as it had come, the silence was shattered by another burst of the storm. The wind resumed its furious howl, and I was forced to retreat back toward the safety of my RV. The night left me drenched, shaken, and filled with an unexpected clarity. In the aftermath of the encounter, as I huddled inside the RV listening, to the relentless patter of rain against the metal roof, I replayed every detail in my mind. The spectral woman, the distorted voices on the radio, the raw ache in my own soul, all of it coalesced into a singular truth. The ghosts of the past, whether they come from broken hearts or tragic accidents, have a way of lingering in the most unexpected places. They call out to us, urging us to confront the pain we'd rather forget. Over the following days, the storm subsided, and a fragile calm settled over Illinois Beach State Park. The odd radio broadcasts, once filled with mournful whispers and ghostly melodies, faded into a quiet static, replaced by the gentle rhythmic lapping of the lake's waves. I kept the journal close by, its pages a constant reminder of that stormy night and the painful legacy of lost love it recounted. Every time I read its faded words, I felt the weight of the fisherman's grief, and in turn the echo of my own. In the days that followed my confrontation on the beach, I found myself compelled to confront the ghosts that had haunted me long before I ever arrived at this lonely shoreline. I spent long hours sitting on the RV's porch, watching the sunrise and reflecting on the memories that had once tormented me. I realized that the spectral figure wasn't merely a remnant of the past. She was a mirror, reflecting back at me all the unresolved guilt, regret, and sorrow that I had carried like a burden for far too long. With every gentle whisper of the wind and every quiet crash of the waves, I felt an invitation, a call to let go of the pain and embrace the possibility of healing. I began to speak aloud to the silence, as if addressing both the ghosts of the past and the unseen forces that seemed to dwell in the spaces between the dunes. "I forgive you," I would murmur into the cool morning air. and in doing so, I felt a small part of the old wounds begin to mend. It wasn't an instantaneous cure, but rather a slow, painful process of acceptance. The landscape, with its shifting sands and ceaseless tides, became a living metaphor for my own inner transformation, a constant reminder that even in the wake of devastation, there is always a chance for renewal. One crisp morning, after a night of unusually still air, I decided that it was time to repair the lingering issues with the RV. I wasn't ready to leave this place entirely, not yet. There was something in the air, some promise of closure that I needed to grasp before I could truly move on. I spent the day tinkering with the heater and coaxing life back into the radio, determined to rid myself of the mechanical failings that had become all too familiar on this journey. As I worked, I found that the simple physical act of repairing the RV served as a grounding force, a way to channel my turbulent emotions into something tangible and practical. By the time dusk returned, I felt a cautious sense of optimism. The repairs were modest, but they symbolized a larger shift inside me, a willingness to confront my vulnerabilities and to mend the broken pieces of my heart. I took the journal with me on a solitary walk along the beach that evening, the pages crinkling softly in the cool wind. With each step, the memories of the tragic tale and my own recent confrontation with the spectral figure seemed to blend into one, forming a tapestry of sorrow and hope that stretched out before me like the endless shoreline. Standing at the water's edge, I looked out over the lake as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. In that quiet moment, the boundary between the past and the present blurred once more, and I felt a profound connection to everything: the lost fisherman, the woman in the journal, and even my own shattered dreams. I knew that I could never fully escape the ghosts that had defined so much of my life, but I also understood that they no longer held the power to control me. I was learning to live with them, to acknowledge their presence without being overwhelmed by their sorrow. As night settled in, the radio, now fixed and humming softly with a clear station, offered nothing more than gentle background music. No longer the vessel for ghostly messages, but simply a comforting reminder that life continued unabated even in the quietest corners of the world. I returned to the RV with a newfound resolve, the weight of regret slowly giving way to a tentative hope for the future. I knew that the journey ahead would still be fraught with challenges, both mechanical and emotional, but I also recognized that I had taken the first vital steps toward healing. In the days that followed, I made peace with the idea that my time at Illinois Beach State Park was only a chapter in my life, a necessary interlude where I faced my inner demons and began to rebuild. I left the journal on a small table in the RV, its presence a silent testament to the encounter that had changed me forever. Every time I glanced at it, I was reminded of the storm, the spectral figure, and the raw, unfiltered emotion that had surged through me that fateful night. I felt a bittersweet gratitude for the experience, knowing that only by facing my past head-on could I truly move forward. When the day finally came for me to pack up and leave, I did so with a mixture of melancholy and relief. I started the RV, now running a little smoother, its broken pieces repaired both mechanically and metaphorically, and drove away from the beach, leaving behind a place that had been as much a crucible of transformation as it was a sanctuary of solitude. The familiar hum of the engine and the clear notes of the radio accompanied me as I hit the open road once more. I wasn't sure what awaited me on the other side of this journey, but I knew that I had been changed irrevocably by the echoes of the shore. Even now, months later, I find that the memory of that autumn escape remains with me like a persistent, gentle reminder. When I drive along quiet highways, I sometimes catch the faintest hint of that sorrowful melody on the radio, a whisper of a ghostly love song that no longer haunts me with dread, but serves instead as a reminder of the pain I once carried and the healing I've since embraced. I remember the spectral figure standing on the dunes, her eyes full of sorrow and longing, and I think of the words I spoke into that stormy night, words that allowed me to finally begin forgiving myself for the mistakes of the past. My journey along the lakeshore was more than an escape from heartbreak. It was a confrontation with every fragment of my shattered self. In that rugged, isolated corner of Illinois, where the relentless waves of Lake Michigan met the silent sands, I learned that healing is neither linear nor instantaneous. It is a process, a gradual letting go of the ghosts that cling to our memories and a brave acceptance of the future that beckons with each new sunrise. I now carry that lesson with me as I continue on the winding roads of my life. The RV, with its creaks and quirks, has become more than just a vehicle. It is a reminder of the journey I undertook and the inner strength I discovered along the way. And while I will always remember the stormy nights and the spectral whispers, I no longer fear them. Instead, I see them as part of the tapestry that makes up who I am, a man who once sought refuge from pain and found, in the echoes by the shore, the courage to rebuild his life. So whenever the wind picks up and the sound of distant waves reaches my ears, I close my eyes and smile, grateful for the haunting memories that helped me rediscover hope. My name is Ryan Taylor, and I'm 42 years old, a man who once wandered, alone in search of solace, and emerged with a heart a little less broken and a spirit ready to embrace the promise of tomorrow. My name is Logan Price, and I'm 28 years old. This all happened in the summer of 2023, not long after I left the force, a decision that still haunts me with its crushing weight of guilt and regret. I had spent too many nights tormented by memories of that fateful operation, the one where a single mistake cost lives and shattered my sense of duty. I needed to escape, if only for a while, to find some semblance of peace and clarity. So I loaded up my old RV, a reliable, if worn, companion, and set off for Rock Cut State Park in northern Illinois near Rockford. I craved isolation, a space where the dense woods, rocky outcrops, and the shimmering reservoir could swallow me whole, leaving behind the incessant clamor of my past mistakes. The drive out of the city was a blur of endless highways and the monotonous hum of the RV's engine, interspersed with my own thoughts and the occasional memory of what had happened. I kept a battered journal on the dashboard, a place to spill out the emotions I'd long suppressed. Every mile took me further from a life that had become unbearable, and closer to a wilderness where I hoped to confront the demons that had followed me for so long. When I finally arrived at Rock Cut State Park, the first thing that struck me was the silence. The park was vast and quiet, its beauty both breathtaking and intimidating. I parked the RV in a small clearing near the edge of the woods, surrounded by ancient trees whose gnarled branches stretched out like skeletal hands. I could feel the solitude settle around me, thick and palpable, and for a moment it was exactly what I needed. I set up camp and spent the first day exploring the trails, trying to ground myself in the present. I took slow, measured steps along winding paths, jotting down observations and thoughts in my journal. But as dusk fell, I began to notice subtle details that disturbed the calm. Late one evening, while checking the perimeter of my makeshift campsite, I spotted a set of footprints near the back of the RV. They were not large, more like the careful, almost tentative steps of someone trying not to be noticed, but they were fresh. I felt a prickle of unease run down my spine. I convinced myself that perhaps a local hiker had passed by, but deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't entirely alone. In the quiet hours of the night, I heard what sounded like distant echoes of a police scanner. Distorted, voices and crackles that reminded me all too vividly of the days when I used to patrol the city streets. It was as if the remnants of my past were seeping into this new world, blending with the natural sounds of the forest. The RV itself wasn't immune to the strange happenings. On several occasions, the lights flickered without warning, and the radio, which had been mostly silent since I arrived, would burst into static punctuated by garbled snippets of what might have been voices. Each time I tried to fix it, suspecting a technical glitch, but the disturbances only grew more persistent. At night, during my solitary walks under a canopy of stars, I began to glimpse fleeting shapes at the edge of my vision. Shadowy figures that vanished as soon as I turned to look directly at them. I told myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me in the isolation, but the sensation of being watched never quite left me. As days passed, the isolation of Rock-Cut State Park began to take its toll. I found myself lost in memories, the dense forest and the relentless quiet blurring the lines between reality and the past. Every rustle in the underbrush, every creak of the old RV, seemed to whisper reminders of that disastrous night in uniform. I started to question whether the strange occurrences were merely coincidences, or if they were manifestations of the guilt and fear that had lodged deep within me. One particularly humid night, after a day of restless pacing and sleepless moments, I decided to take a long walk to clear my head. The forest was alive with sounds, the chirping of crickets, the distant hoot of an owl, and the soft murmur of wind through the trees. My footsteps crunched softly on the gravel path as I wandered deeper into the woods. It was during one of these solitary excursions that I noticed something truly unsettling. Carved into the rough bark of an old oak were symbols and cryptic markings that looked almost ritualistic in nature. They were not random scrawls. They appeared deliberate, as if someone had been leaving messages in the language of the forest. My mind raced. Had these been here long before I arrived? Or were they a recent addition, meant as a warning? I snapped a few photos with my phone, my hands trembling slightly as I documented the markings. The more I looked at them, the more they stirred something inside me, a mingling of dread and recognition. Back at the RV, I tried to convince myself that I was simply experiencing the side effects of too much solitude, but the evidence was becoming undeniable. One night, I awoke to the sound of footsteps outside the RV, slow and measured. I crept to the window and peered into the darkness, but saw nothing beyond the swaying trees. I could feel my heart pounding, each beat echoing the fear of what might be lurking just out of sight. Every noise, every whisper of the wind, began to take on a menacing quality. I began to wonder if I was losing my grip on reality, or if something truly supernatural was at work in these woods. The turning point came on a rain-soaked night when the storm descended with a fury I had never experienced. The wind howled like a living thing, and rain pounded the RV with relentless intensity. In the midst of the chaos, the radio suddenly sprang to life with a series of distorted voices. It wasn't the usual static. It was as if someone, or something, was trying to communicate. I fumbled with the dial, trying desperately to cut through the noise, but all I got was an overwhelming cacophony of unintelligible sounds. The power flickered, and for a moment, the RV was plunged into darkness. I lit a small lantern and stepped outside, drawn by an inexplicable urge to confront whatever was behind the disturbances. Under the relentless downpour, I made my way toward a part of the forest that I hadn't yet explored. The path was slippery and treacherous, and every step felt like a journey into the unknown. I couldn't shake the sensation that I was being guided, drawn by an unseen force towards something that was waiting for me. After what felt like hours of wandering, I stumbled upon an old, dilapidated building hidden among the trees. It was an abandoned ranger station, its once proud structure now weathered and overgrown with vines. The sight of it sent a chill down my spine. I felt as though I had inadvertently trespassed into a forbidden space. Inside, the air was stale and thick with disuse. Dust motes floated in the weak beam of my lantern as I carefully explored the building. In a far corner, beneath a collapsed desk, I discovered a small pile of old files and photographs. My hands trembled as I sifted through them. There were faded images of smiling rangers and handwritten notes detailing various incidents from decades past. But what caught my attention most was a neatly folded, yellowed letter addressed to me. I stared at it, heart-pounding, unable to understand how a letter meant for me could be here, in this forgotten station deep in the forest. With shaking hands, I opened the letter. Its contents were a jumbled mix of remorse and sorrow, a confession of failures, regrets, and a sense of responsibility for a tragedy that had occurred long ago. The letter recounted the details of an operation much like the one I had been involved in, the night when mistakes led to irrevocable loss. As I read, memories came flooding back, the sound of alarms, the desperate calls over the radio, the faces of those I had failed to save. The words in the letter seemed to echo my own innermost thoughts. as if someone had laid bare the secrets I had locked away deep inside my soul. I was overwhelmed by a tidal wave of guilt and sorrow. The line between the past and the present began to blur, and I found myself reliving those harrowing moments with an intensity that left me breathless. I sat on the cold, dusty floor of the ranger station for what felt like hours, the letter clutched tightly in my hand. The storm outside raged on, its fury mirroring the tumult within me. Every crash of thunder, every flash of lightning, seemed to punctuate the painful truths laid out before me. It was as though the forest itself was compelling me to confront the mistakes of my past. In that abandoned building, surrounded by relics of a bygone era, I felt the full weight of my guilt and regret. I began to see visions, ghostly images, of the night that had cost so many lives, replete with the faces of those I had lost and the cold, unyielding expression of my own failure. They were so vivid that I could almost reach out and touch them, as if the past were unfolding before my eyes. Unable to bear the suffocating intensity of my emotions, I finally stood up and left the ranger station. The rain had eased into a steady, relentless drizzle, and I found myself stumbling back into the dark, endless forest. I didn't know where I was headed, only that I needed to escape the overwhelming barrage of memories and the haunting revelations of that place. My footsteps echoed in the silence as I hurried along a narrow trail, the weight of the letter a constant reminder of the burden I had carried for so long. It wasn't long before the forest seemed to close in around me. Every rustle of leaves, every shadow that shifted in the periphery of my vision, felt charged with a menacing presence. I sensed that I was being followed, though every time I glanced back there was nothing but the dark, whispering woods. My mind, already frayed by guilt and isolation, began to blur the lines between reality and hallucination. I caught fleeting images of a figure, a man or perhaps a specter, lurking in the distance, always just out of reach. The paranoia that had been simmering beneath the surface now bubbled to the forefront of my consciousness. Then, on a night when the sky was ink black and the rain had returned in full force, everything came to a head. I was out for one of my nocturnal walks, trying to steady my racing thoughts, when I heard a sound that made my blood run cold. A low, almost inaudible whisper that seemed to call my name. I froze in place, my heart pounding in my ears. The voice was not a hallucination, it was as real as the pounding rain around me. I took a hesitant step forward, following the sound, until I found myself in a small clearing illuminated by the erratic light of a lightning strike. There, standing at the edge of the clearing, was a figure. At first I could see nothing more than a dark silhouette moving with a slow, deliberate gait among the trees. But as the flash of lightning illuminated the scene, I saw that the figure was wearing a familiar expression of sorrow and regret, a mirror of my own haunted eyes. For a moment I believed that I was face to face with my past, a living, breathing manifestation of every mistake, every failure that had defined my life. Since that tragic night, I wanted to run, to flee from the unbearable intensity of that realization, but my feet were rooted to the spot. The figure stepped forward silently, and I could see now that it was not an external assailant at all, but a part of me, a personification of the guilt that had haunted my every waking moment. It was as if my inner demons had taken on flesh and blood, determined to confront me in the most literal sense. In that heart-pounding moment amid the torrential downpour and the oppressive darkness of the forest, I realized that I had reached a crossroads. I could either continue to run from the past that had defined me for so long, or I could face it head-on and find a way to forgive myself. With every ounce of courage I could muster, I stepped forward toward the spectral figure. My voice, barely, a whisper over the sound of the rain, broke the silence. "I'm sorry," I said, the words laden with years of remorse and regret. "I'm so damn sorry for what happened that night. I failed and I can't change that, but I need to let it go." The figure regarded me silently, its eyes dark and inscrutable, and for what felt like an eternity, we stood there in the rain, locked in a silent struggle. Then, almost imperceptibly, the figure began to dissolve into the mist, an ethereal presence that faded with each drop of rain. In that moment, I felt a strange, almost cathartic lightness, as though the burden of my guilt was slowly lifting from my shoulders. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the crumpled letter from the ranger station, the tangible evidence of my past transgressions. With trembling hands, I tore it to shreds, scattering the fragments into the wind as if casting off the weight of years of self-recrimination. For a long while after that, I stood alone in the clearing, the storm gradually subsiding into a steady drizzle, and a profound silence taking its place. The forest, which had moments before seemed to pulse with the malevolent echoes of my past, now felt strangely calm, as if it had accepted my silent vow of forgiveness. I knew that the process was far from over. Healing would be a slow, arduous journey, but that night in that rain-soaked clearing I had taken the first step. The next morning I returned to the RV with a heavy yet hopeful heart. The eerie occurrences that had plagued me in the nights before had quieted, as if the forest itself were giving me space to begin anew. I gathered my scattered belongings and took one last look at the abandoned ranger station before leaving it behind, a relic of a time when I could no longer run from my past. As I climbed back into the RV, I felt a quiet resolve settling in. I wasn't entirely free of my guilt, but I had confronted it, if only in a symbolic way, and I was ready to move forward. Driving out of Rock Cut State Park that day, I took one final glance at the dense woods receding in the rearview mirror. I knew that my past would always be a part of who I was, a scar that time could never completely erase. But it no longer had the power to define my future. I resolved then to seek professional help, to reach out to the people I had once pushed away, and to begin the long, uncertain journey toward healing. The open road stretched out before me, filled with both promise and uncertainty, but for the first time in a long while, I felt ready to embrace whatever lay ahead. Now, months later, I still reflect on that summer at Rock Cut State Park with a mixture of sorrow and gratitude. I continue to drive my old RV, each journey a small step toward understanding and forgiving myself. I sometimes catch a glimpse of something, a shadow at the edge of my vision, a familiar whisper on a quiet night, and I no longer recoil in fear. Instead, I see them as gentle reminders of the path I've traveled, the mistakes I've made, and the hard-won lessons that have brought me to where I am today. I keep my journal close, filling its pages with both the dark memories of my past and the hopeful sketches of a future I'm slowly rebuilding. Every entry is a testament to the fact that even in the depths of isolation and guilt, there is a way to confront the demons within and begin to heal. The forest taught me that sometimes the most daunting battles are the ones fought inside, and that true redemption comes not from erasing the past, but from accepting it and choosing to move forward. As I continue my journey, I remain ever vigilant, not against external threats, but against the internal whispers of self-doubt and regret that can so easily lead one astray. I've learned that sometimes the mind can be its own worst enemy, and that the path to inner peace is often littered with the remnants of battles long fought. Yet each day, as I drive along quiet back roads and pass through small towns that seem frozen in time, I feel a growing strength within me. I am learning to trust myself again, to believe that I can find redemption, and that my future does not have to be defined by a single, tragic night. I often think back to that torrential night in the forest, when the rain mingled with my tears and the ghost of my guilt took shape before my eyes. I remember the weight of the torn letter in my hands, the sound of my voice barely audible over the storm, and the surreal moment when the figure dissolved into nothingness. It was a moment of terrifying clarity and unexpected liberation, a moment that changed me, even if only imperceptibly from the inside out. Now, when I pass through places that remind me of that fateful summer, I no longer feel the oppressive weight of isolation or fear. Instead, I feel a quiet determination, a resolve to continue facing my inner demons, no matter how deeply they are buried. I have learned that healing is not a destination but a journey, and that every mile traveled brings me closer to the man I aspire to be. My name is Logan Price, and I'm 28 years old. A man who once ran from the echoes of a painful past, but who has, in time, learned to face those echoes with courage and compassion. The scars of that journey will always be with me, a permanent reminder of the mistakes I made and the redemption I continue to seek. And though the road ahead is uncertain, I now travel it with a heart a little lighter and a soul that is finally beginning to forgive itself.